The area of St. Louis, Missouri during the Civil War was divided into pro-slavery and anti-slavery. During War I, segregation and racism became a habit for these communities. When white workers at Aluminium Ore Company in East St. Louis complained about their conditions, the company took the decision to employ black people who will not complain and will work for less amount of money to take the whites' jobs. As they moved to East St. Louis and created a community in it, segregation was getting stronger and whites were furious about their jobs. They called this invasion. Whites were protesting the blacks' migration with the excuse that they were being dragged out of the community. Influx migration of Irish, Japanese, and Chinese were accused of the same reason decades before 1917, the tendency to favour native inhabitants as opposed to immigrants called nativism. On July 2nd, 1917, a car driven by white people shot out windows of houses and businesses of the black community. That same night, some police officers went to East St. Louis to investigate what recently happened. Since they were driving a similar car, they were shot accidentally as blacks thought they were the white people that were there before. The police officers died, and that morning big mobs of whites started gathering to plan revenge for this deliberated action against the police officers. The mob did not distinguish age or gender. That day, almost 200 African Americans died, their houses were burned, businesses were destroyed, and a whole town was in ruins after that day. A precise description of the occurred was given by Olivia B. Waxman in her article in Time magazine. The forgotten march that started the national civil rights movement took place 100 years ago. From noonday until midnight, they killed and beat and murdered. They dashed out the brains of children and stripped off the clothes of women. They drove victims into the flames and hanged the helpless to the lighting poles. Fathers were killed before the faces of mothers. Children were burned, heads were cut off with axes, pregnant women crawled and spawned in dark, wet fields. Thieves went through houses and firebrands followed. Bodies were thrown from bridges and rocks, and bricks flew through the air. Sadly and gladly, riots have occurred all around the world. Riots and people involved in them shape and redirect societies. The definition of a riot is a social occasion involving relatively spontaneous collective violence directed at property, persons, or authority. During riots, individuals become irrational, highly suggestible, and without social control. There are four main types of riots: a communal riot, where there is collective violence towards an opposite group; a community riot, defined as collective violence directed against property; a protest riot, violence against a specific policy; and the most common one, the revelry or celebration that usually occurs after a win. Since human beings have lived in communities and societies, social problems have always existed. Surviving started being our first priority, and it still is. We used to kill for food, now we kill for money. The human nature has guided us to protect our best interests. However, most of the times we go over a line that cannot be crossed today called human rights. As important as every riot is, there are some that have affected our society in various ways. This is the top 10 worst riots worldwide published by El Matador Network. Number 10. Los Angeles, April 29th, 1992. A video of two police officers beating a black man who was defenseless, while other officers are enjoying the show. 2 months later, the justice determined that the officers were found innocent. This created a rejection on the case, and many went out to the streets to protest. Thousands were injured, 53 deaths, and $1 billion in damages. Number 9. Hong Kong, May 1967. Pro-communists were against the British-ruled Hong Kong. For this reason, the leftists set bombs around the city and killed 51 people, 800 injured, and millions of dollars in damage. Number 8. Tulsa, May 31st, 1921. A sexual assault of white female elevator operator by a black man created a 16-hour racial conflict that left 10,000 people homeless. Members of both races generated a mob with 39 deaths and damages of $21 million. Number 7. Detroit, July 23rd, 1967. An illegal bar in Detroit was hosting a homecoming party for two veterans with 100 people. The police came into the poorest zone of the city, where the bar was located, started arresting some while others, drunk and upset, began to protest. As the sun came up, many onlookers noticed the incident and contributed to the protest that finished up in a riot. 43 died that day, 1,189 were injured, and there were 7,000 arrested. Number 6, Sao Paulo. October 2nd, 1992, in the largest jail in Latin America, known as Carandiru, built for 3,500 inmates, but it held 8,000 on the day of the riot. As some inmates got out of control, the guards brutally tried to control them by killing 102 prisoners. Somehow, no guard died, hundreds were injured, and the police never accepted the blame. Number 5, Bombay, December 1992. The destruction of the largest mosque in an area of Muslims. The Babri Mosque turned a political rally to destructive riot. After the Supreme Court had assured that the mosque would not be harmed, Muslims v 7 Hindus in different cities of India left 900 dead and thousands injured. Number 4, Kenya. December 1992, the results of a presidential election that could have changed Kenya's future did not have the result it needed. Kibaki is still president. The fury in Kenyans was so uncontrollable that at the end of the month more than 800 were dead, 6,000 were homeless, and the damages cost billions. Number 3, Gujarat. February 27, 2002, a train with 58 Hindus was set on fire by a Muslim mob. Not only civilians played a large role in the death of more than 1,000 people, but also the media and the resulting trials and court cases that were unjust and corrupt. Number 2, New York draft riots, July 13, 1863. Immigrants from Ireland and other outside countries were unwilling to fight in the Civil War for a country that they had just arrived to, and for people who could take their jobs in the future. The mob killed 120 people, thousands were injured, and the damages covered up to $185 million. Number 1, Nika riots, Constantinople, 532. Back in the days, chariot racing was the main sport. It usually created some riots that even athletics participated in. One classic game, the best 2 teams played, and after the game, the usual riots increased its level of terrifying damages as it left half of the city in flames and 30,000 dead. Riots are not something from this past centuries. They have always been in human history and have shaped our society. However, there is still room for improvement is its efficiency and the way they transmit the messages. Riots can create unimaginable changes in a community or only deaths. The main focus of a riot should be the improvement of its society and how it can be beneficial to others.